What if you woke up one day and didn't know what you had done wrong, but everyone else did? What if the rules were written in a language you couldn't read, and the people who judged you didn't speak at all? What if God existed, but he never answered, and you kept knocking anyway? Welcome to the world of Franz Kafka, a world where everything matters, but nothing can be explained. Kafka didn't write like a philosopher. He never laid out arguments or systems. But through his strange and haunting stories, he asked the deepest questions anyone can ask. Who am I? What do I owe? Why is the world so silent when I need answers? His fiction feels like a dream you can't wake up from, and somehow it feels more real than waking life. In his diaries, Kafka wrote, "All I am is literature, and I am not able or willing to be anything else." But this literature does something that philosophy often can't. It doesn't just think about despair. It makes you feel it. It brings you face to face with guilt, loneliness, and the strange systems that rule our lives, from governments to families to the hidden laws of the soul. This essay explores Kafka's world in 5 parts: his vision of absurd power, the alienated self, the hunger for justice, the mystery of meaning, and the quiet ethics of endurance. We begin, as Kafka often does, with a man knocking on a door that never opens. Life without answers. Franz Kafka never told us what the world really means, but he showed us what it feels like to live in one where meaning hides, shifts, or disappears just when you think you found it. In his stories, people follow rules they don't understand, face trials without knowing their crimes, and wait for answers that never come. His characters often feel lost, not just in the world, but inside themselves. Kafka lived in a time of great change. He was born in 1883 in Prague, into a Jewish family living under the Austro-Hungarian Empire. He spoke German, but he wasn't fully accepted by the German community. He was Jewish, but not religious. He worked a day job in insurance, but wanted to write. He once said, "What do I have in common with the Jews? I hardly have anything in common with myself." This feeling of not belonging anywhere shows up again and again in his work. It's like his characters are always outsiders, even in their own lives. Kafka didn't write books full of ideas like a normal philosopher. He wrote stories full of uncertainty, silence, and strange events that never get explained. But these stories ask big questions. What is justice? Why do we feel guilty even when we've done nothing wrong? What is the point of living in a world where no one listens? His story. The trial begins with a man named Joseph K., who is arrested one morning without being told why. He keeps trying to find out what the charge is, who is behind it, and what he can do to defend himself. But every door he opens leads to another closed hallway. The people he meets speak in riddles or avoid his questions. He's told, "You're guilty," but never how or why. In the end, he dies without ever learning the truth. It's not just a story about a broken legal system. It's about a world that pretends to have order while hiding its true face. This is where Kafka touches something very deep. Many of us go through life trying to do the right thing, trying to follow rules, family rules, social rules, religious rules. But what if those rules don't lead anywhere? What if the people who made them don't know what they mean either? Kafka's stories are about that moment when you realize no one is really in control, and no one is coming to explain. In a short piece called Before the Law, a man stands before a gate, trying to get inside. There's a doorkeeper who tells him he can't enter, not yet. The man waits his whole life, growing old outside the door. Just before he dies, he asks why no one else has ever come to try and enter. The doorkeeper says, "This gate was made only for you. I'm now going to shut it." That's it. No further meaning is given. Just a man, a door, and a life of waiting. What makes this so powerful is that it doesn't tell you what to think. It makes you feel the weight of not knowing. You start to wonder, what door am I standing in front of? What am I waiting for? Am I spending my life trying to follow rules that were made for someone else? Kafka never gives us answers. That's part of what makes his work so lasting. His stories open up questions that stay with you long after you read them. They don't comfort, they disturb, but they also make you look at the world in a new way. As Kafka once wrote, "A book must be the axe for the frozen sea within us." His fiction is cold, strange, often cruel, but it breaks something open. It shows us that the world might not explain itself, but we still have to live in it. And somehow, we must try to understand, even if no one ever opens the door. Trapped in the system. In Kafka's world, power is everywhere, but it never has a clear face. You can feel it pressing down on you, but you can't point to where it comes from. You're caught inside a machine, and you don't know who built it or why it runs the way it does. That's the feeling you get when you read The Trial or The Castle. The systems in these stories don't just confuse, they crush, and the people caught in them keep searching for answers that may not even exist. In The Trial, Joseph K. is a man arrested by a mysterious court. No one tells him what law he broke. There's no trial in the normal sense. The judges are hidden. The courtrooms are tucked away in attics and basements. Everything feels half secret, half chaotic. At one point, Joseph says, "It's only because of their stupidity that they're able to be so sure of themselves." This shows the heart of Kafka's vision. The people in power might not be evil. They might just be blind. But their blindness still destroys lives. It's not just a story about one man's trial. It's about how systems, governments, courts, workplaces can become so big and complex that no one understands them anymore. People just follow the rules because they're afraid. No one questions the machine. And slowly, the machine becomes more real than the people inside it. In his book, The Castle, the character known only as K arrives in a village governed by a distant, unreachable castle. He wants to speak to the authorities there. He wants to be recognized. But no one gives him a straight answer. Everyone says, "You'll have to wait," or "Someone else is in charge." He is passed from person to person, document to document. He spends the whole novel trying to get inside the system, and never does. The castle remains distant and silent. Here, Kafka shows how power is not always violent or loud. Sometimes it works through confusion, through delay, through rules no one understands. The real danger is not that you're punished. It's that you're forgotten, that you become part of the system and lose your name, your face, your reason for being. These stories don't just reflect political systems. They reflect something deeper, the human need for justice, and how painful it is when justice doesn't come. Kafka's characters don't just want freedom, they want to be told the truth. They want someone to say, "Here is your crime. Here is your chance to explain. Here is what you must do to be forgiven." But the system doesn't offer that. It only offers more doors, more forms, more silence. In his letters, Kafka once wrote, "The court wants nothing from you. It receives you when you come, and it dismisses you when you go." This captures the quiet cruelty of these systems. They are not hunting you. They're not even angry. They just don't care. In this way, Kafka's vision is not just dark. It also carries a strange kind of hope. Not hope that the system will change, but hope that we can remain awake inside it, that we can keep looking for meaning even when meaning is hidden. Power, in Kafka's world, is often absurd. It is built on empty rituals and blind habits. But his characters remind us that the search for truth still matters, even if the truth is never found. And in that endless search, we see not only suffering, but also a quiet kind of courage, feeling like a stranger in your own life. Franz Kafka knew what it meant to feel like a stranger, not just in the world, but in your own skin. His characters often live on the edge of life, not quite belonging, not quite seen. This feeling of not fitting in, of being out of place, runs through almost everything Kafka wrote. It is one of the deepest parts of his vision, the idea that modern life doesn't just isolate people from others, but from themselves. Nowhere is this clearer than in his book, The Metamorphosis. The story begins with a strange and unforgettable line. When Gregor Samsa woke one morning from uneasy dreams, he found himself transformed in his bed into a gigantic insect. Kafka never explains how or why this happened. It just is. Gregor, once a hard-working salesman supporting his family, wakes up and discovers he has become something less than human. But the real horror isn't the transformation, it's what happens afterward. His family, who once depended on him, becomes ashamed. They hide him. They stop speaking to him. Over time, they forget that he was ever their son or brother. Gregor, who still understands them, becomes a silent creature trapped behind a door. He dies alone. This isn't just a story about turning into a bug. It's about what happens when someone loses their place in the world, when work, family, and society no longer see you as valuable. Kafka is asking, what is left of a person when the world stops recognizing them? In his own life, Kafka felt this deeply. He once wrote, "I am made of literature, and nothing else interests me." But his job at an insurance office wore him down. He didn't marry. He feared being misunderstood. His letters and diaries are full of self-doubt and a painful sense of distance from others. He often saw himself as already disappearing. His characters reflect this inner exile. They are not heroes. They are quiet, uncertain, and often passive. But that's part of what makes them so human. They don't know who they are anymore, but they keep trying to make sense of it. They keep listening, watching, hoping for a sign that they still matter. In this way, Kafka shows us something many people feel but rarely say, that alienation is not just about being alone, it's about being unseen, about waking up one day and realizing that the life you were living no longer fits, or worse, that it never did. And yet, even in this deep sense of loss, Kafka's writing doesn't give up completely. There's still a quiet dignity in Gregor's story. He still tries to love his family. He still listens. Even as he fades away, something in him remains human. Kafka doesn't offer a solution to alienation, but he gives it a voice. And sometimes, being able to name what we feel is the first step toward bearing it. Waiting for meaning that never comes. Reading Kafka can feel like standing in front of a locked door, not knowing what's on the other side. You knock, you wait, but nothing opens. His stories are full of symbols, but they don't come with keys. Instead of giving answers, Kafka gives questions. And sometimes, those questions go deeper than any explanation ever could. One of the most famous examples of this is his short parable we discussed earlier called Before the Law. A man comes to a gate, hoping to gain entry to the law. A doorkeeper tells him he can't go in, not now, maybe later. The man waits his entire life outside that gate. Just before he dies, he asks why no one else ever came. The doorkeeper replies, "This door was made only for you. I'm now going to shut it. That's the end." This tiny story has puzzled readers for over a century. What is the law? Why couldn't the man enter? What was he waiting for? The story doesn't explain. And that's the point. Kafka is showing us what it's like to live in a world where truth is always just out of reach. A world full of doors, but no clear way through. Kafka loved parables. He once wrote, "All these parables really set out to say merely that the incomprehensible is incomprehensible, and we know that already." But he didn't mean that truth doesn't exist. He meant that truth isn't simple. It doesn't come to us in straight lines. It hides behind symbols, gestures, silences. In many of his stories, characters are searching, not just for justice or identity, but for meaning itself. They want to know what the rules are, what things mean, why they suffer. But the answers, if they come at all, are strange, incomplete, or silent. Even Kafka's writing style reflects this. His sentences are careful, precise, but they never settle. They always feel like they're pointing towards something just outside the frame. A feeling, a truth, a message, but we're not quite allowed to grasp it. It's like looking at a shape through frosted glass. You know it's there, but you can't describe it. This makes Kafka's stories feel more like dreams or riddles than arguments, and that's part of what makes them so powerful. They speak to something beyond logic, something we feel but can't name. He invites us into a space where not understanding is the point, where mystery isn't a failure, but a condition of being alive. In today's world, we often look for quick answers. We want meaning fast, clear, and useful. Kafka slows us down. He reminds us that some questions don't have clean answers, that sometimes the most honest thing we can say is, I don't know. And yet, even in the confusion, Kafka's stories aren't empty. They're full of longing for meaning, for justice, for truth. His characters knock on doors, wait by gates, write letters, climb hills, not because they're foolish, but because they still believe there might be something worth finding. Kafka doesn't explain the mystery. He invites us to live inside it. And maybe, in doing so, he shows us something deeper than certainty, the courage to keep asking. On the surface, Kafka's world looks hopeless. His characters are trapped. They are judged without cause, forgotten without reason, turned away at the gates of meaning. No one comes to save them. There are no miracles, no final answers. But if you look more closely, there's something else buried in that darkness, a strange kind of hope, not the loud kind, not the kind that solves everything, but a quiet hope that still chooses to endure even when nothing makes sense. Kafka once wrote in a letter, "There is infinite hope, but not for us." It sounds like a cruel joke. But it's also one of the clearest pictures of how he saw the world. The universe might contain meaning, truth, or redemption, but it is not handed to us. We must live without guarantees. We must go on even when the door never opens. This is what makes Kafka's characters quietly heroic, not because they win or succeed or even understand what's happening to them, but because they keep trying. Joseph K. in the trial searches for answers until the end. K. in the castle keeps climbing the hill. Gregor Samsa, even as a giant insect, still tries to care for his family. Their strength is not in changing their fate, but in not giving up on the search. In his story, A Hunger Artist, a man fasts for weeks in a public cage. People used to come watch him, but over time, they lose interest. In the end, he dies, and no one really cares. He tells a guard just before he dies, "I always wanted you to admire my fasting." When asked why he fasts, he says, "Because I couldn't find any food I liked." On one level, it's absurd, but on another, it's deeply human. He was searching for something real, something pure, and never found it. Still, he held on to that search until the end. This is where Kafka's quiet ethics live, not in rules or doctrines, but in how we carry ourselves when the world no longer makes sense. When we are abandoned by meaning, do we still act with dignity? Do we still try to love, to speak honestly, to seek truth, even if it never arrives? Kafka's religious background plays a role here too. He grew up Jewish but was not deeply observant. Still, his writing is full of a kind of spiritual hunger. His characters long for judgment, for grace, for some divine voice to speak. But that voice never comes. It's like God is always just behind the next door, and we never quite reach him. In his aphorisms, Kafka often writes about this feeling of waiting for something beyond us. One of them says, "The Messiah will come only when he is no longer necessary." It's a haunting thought, that redemption only arrives when we've given up on being saved. Until then, we must live as if it matters, even if we can't prove that it does. That's what makes Kafka's world so difficult and so human. It forces us to look at the space where meaning used to be and keep walking anyway. His characters live in silence, but they don't stop listening. They don't become cruel or careless. They still try to speak, to understand, to be seen. In a world that feels increasingly confusing and chaotic, Kafka's quiet endurance matters more than ever. He doesn't tell us how to fix the system. He doesn't give us a way out. But he gives us a way through, by facing the absurd, not with despair, but with a stubborn kind of faith. Not faith in answers, but in the worth of the search itself. Kafka's stories may end in silence, but inside that silence, something still speaks. The human need to ask, to seek, to hope. Not loudly, not with certainty, but with persistence. That is Kafka's quiet heroism. And maybe, in the end, it's the most honest kind there is. Now, bring all the concepts together. What does it mean to keep searching when nothing is certain, when the world won't answer back? That's the quiet ache at the heart of Franz Kafka's writing. He didn't give us heroes or happy endings. He gave us people stuck in strange, shadowy systems, trying to understand what's happening to them, trying to hold on to something human in a world that often feels cold and senseless. Kafka never offered clear answers. Instead, he gave us stories that feel like dreams, unsettling, beautiful, and full of questions. In The Trial in the Castle, we saw how power can become so big and confusing that it no longer needs to explain itself. In The Metamorphosis, we felt what it's like to lose our place in the world and to be forgotten by the people we love. Through parables like Before the Law, Kafka reminded us that meaning often stays behind a closed door, just out of reach. But in all of this, Kafka's characters never completely gave up. They kept climbing, asking, waiting. That's where his deepest message lies, not in victory, but in persistence. Even when justice doesn't come, even when identity falls apart, even when God is silent, there's still something sacred about not letting go of the search. Kafka's world is difficult, yes, but it's also honest. It doesn't lie to us. It sits beside us in the confusion and quietly says, "Keep going anyway." And sometimes that quiet is the most comforting voice of all. If you like this video, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel for more deep content. We cover philosophies of life,